Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to host the panel number 2 for this afternoon, which is a panel with three wonderful presenters from Europe and from the United States. I introduce them in a minute. The title of the panel is NBS Can Contribute to Economic Regeneration, Inclusion, and Societal Well-Being. What role can they play in building back our economy after COVID-19? This session is particularly important because, as we know, the health, the social, the economic crisis that COVID has, in some cases, exacerbated because it was there before, but in other cases, really brought up, makes us ask the question about what role can programs, projects, interventions that are around nature and city contribute also to another form of well-being, economic development, and also security, safety for all groups in society that are being impacted by COVID, and in particular, hopefully, to the most socially vulnerable groups. So we have three presenters who are going to, from their own perspective, from their own organization, cover those topics. I want to thank you all for having Filka Sekulova, Francesc Baró, also from my team being part of the moderation. We work at the Barcelona Lab for Urban Environmental Justice and Sustainability, which is part of the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And a lot of our work is actually on this intersection between nature protection, nature evaluation, and at the same time, social equity and justice. And one quick note is that Lorna and Harriet have really helped us, as well as ICLEI, put together a short documentary that you can find in the Hives, which is called To Green or Not to Green. So have a look at it if you can. It exactly is on this topic of what happens also to the social indicators of well-being when cities are engaging more deeply and more broadly with nature-based solutions. Are the benefits equally distributed, and can they be widely shared by society? So thank you so much for this opportunity. I will now start presenting our first speaker today. Julie Ulrich serves on the Nature Conservancy's North American Cities Network program. As many of you know, the Nature Conservancy is one of the largest nonprofits in the US that works on nature protection and biodiversity. Julie is the inaugural director of one of the Nature Conservancy's first urban conservation programs, and she has extensive experience in sustainable planning and design, with also her work being situated at the intersection of urbanism, ecology, and citizens. Julie is today also a senior fellow with the Environmental Leadership Program and was named one of Next City's Vanguard. So it's a very wonderful prize that she has won. Thank you, Julie, for being here. I'm going to share my screen now so that we can hear your presentation. Sorry. Can you see it? No, not yet. All right, the floor is yours, Julie. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Isabel. Hello, everyone. I am very excited to join you today for such an important and timely series of conversations over the course of the day. As Isabel mentioned, I'm part of TNC's urban conservation team and based out of the United States. Next slide, please. The Nature Conservancy is a global science-based organization that focuses on conservation. We work in 79 countries and territories, and our mission is to protect the land and waters on which all life depends. Next slide, please. As a conservation organization, you might be familiar with our work to protect oceans, lands, and waters. Next slide. Or the types of analyses we do to identify and protect resilient and connected landscapes. Next slide. But we also recognize that cities are key components of a broader ecological landscape, and that what happens in cities will more and more determine whether our lands and waters are healthy, which matters not just for nature's sake, but for our own. Our planet is rapidly urbanizing, which means cities increasingly rely on natural resources for food and water. We know we are not designing our cities with ecosystems in mind, and that is having a drastic adverse effect on our natural resources, our communities, and our families. Cities tend to be hotter than their rural counterparts, largely due to fewer trees and more paved surfaces. Cities also tend to be near coasts, which face increasing climate risks from sea level rise and ever more powerful and frequent storms. Next slide, please. The Nature Conservancy's vision is for people and nature to thrive together. To that end, our goal is to help mainstream urban nature-based solutions to improve quality of life and help cities address challenges in a changing climate. With smart planning, science-based strategies, and strong partnerships, we can help to make the green cities of tomorrow resilient, healthy, and equitable. Next slide, please. The Nature Conservancy has a strong network of urban conservation practitioners across the US. We also have urban conservation practitioners across the globe, but since we're limited on time today, I'll only speak to the US context. For those interested in learning more about our work in other cities like Shenzhen, Monterey, Chennai, feel free to contact me after the presentation. In the US, the cities range from those the size of Los Angeles, New York City, to smaller municipalities with a range of environmental issues and nature-based solution needs. This network is intentionally made up of a diverse group of interdisciplinary staff who bring a wide range of skills, from traditional conservation science expertise to social science, policy, engineering, and community activism. We form a strong community of practice to share resources, learnings, and best practices. Together, this network in the US and across the globe are using urban nature-based solutions to improve water quality and mitigate flooding, protect coastal communities, safeguard biodiversity, alleviate poor air quality and heat islands, and connect people to nature. In the US, our urban conservation work is rooted in equity, inclusion, and justice, and we strive to prioritize conservation initiatives that foster equitable outcomes for historically underrepresented and underserved communities. Next slide, please. Two backbones of what we do and how we get this work done are science and collaboration. These are a few reports we have collaborated on with partners such as C40, Future Earth, the Stockholm Resilience Center, and the Center for Whole Communities to intentionally incorporate equity into our urban conservation efforts right from the start. These reports contain analyses on opportunities for urban nature-based solutions for biodiversity protection, improving air quality based on return on investment of trees, and nature-based solutions for urban water supply. Most of all of these reports look across hundreds of cities globally. Next slide, please. So how do we work to implement these urban nature-based solutions? Yes, cross-sectoral partnerships is something we're all familiar with and are critical, and we absolutely couldn't have success without them. But I really like this image, which illustrates it's not enough to be thinking across sectors for the complex issues we face. We also need to be thinking cross-issue and cross-jurisdiction to help mainstream nature-based solutions, particularly now in light of COVID-19 impacts and economic demand. This is how we have been working on nature-based solutions projects in many cities. Next slide, please. I want to touch on a few examples of how we are working to mainstream these nature-based solutions through projects that are operating at the intersections of issue, sector, and jurisdiction. Each project addresses citywide policy, programmatic, social, technical, and financial needs, all from a nature-based solutions lens. This first initiative addresses the fact that we live in a time period where your zip code determines your life expectancy and stems from the question, what if your neighborhood could improve your health? It's an innovative 5-year study in partnership with the City of Louisville, Kentucky, University of Louisville, the Nature Conservancy, and the United States National Institute of Health, and countless other organizations to do a first of its kind in-depth study on the impact of trees as a public health strategy, specifically for cardiovascular health. Next slide, please. In Washington, D.C., we paired up with impact investors to create the first U.S. stormwater credit trading market to help get green stormwater infrastructure to scale. This work partners with finance institutions, governmental agencies, and a diverse set of landowners to get the work implemented where it otherwise would not be able to because of lack of funding. Next slide. In Philadelphia, we work with communities facing environmental injustice and co-create solutions to green the neighborhood with a variety of nature-based solutions. We are piloting a triple bottom line aggregation model for green stormwater infrastructure to get projects to scale while helping the municipality meet our federal Environmental Protection Agency Clean Water Act compliance. Next slide. And in cities like Los Angeles, Seattle, and New York City, we work with municipal and institutional partners on things such as biodiversity studies to help form large-scale coalitions for nature-based solutions. Next slide. It's impossible to not mention the impact that COVID-19 is having across the globe right now. It too is impacting our nature-based solutions work, not only from an implementation standpoint, but also starting to see patterns across many municipalities that there's more of a hesitancy now to try something new and unknown, particularly because budgets are getting squeezed and the finances are becoming quite tight. However, we know that when we only have so much to spend on rebuilding back, why not get the most out of it? It's a challenge and an opportunity. Of course, there are tremendous opportunities to include nature-based solutions in stimulus packages. The triple dividend of nature-based solutions is precisely why they should play an important role in COVID-19 economic recovery packages. These much-needed stimuli across the globe could offer unique opportunities to inject substantial sums of money into sustainable investments such as tree planting, retrofitting of buildings and more resource-efficient systems, and revamping a number of flood needs and conditions in coastal cities. Directing funds to such efforts could develop societies and economies that are more resilient to future impacts. Next slide, please. And finally, I just wanted to offer a brief set of reflections from my own personal experience, and that is the need for more applied research to get the support of key decision makers to be able to invest in and support nature-based solutions. These key decision makers aren't always who we think they are. For example, lead engineers play a massive role in terms of getting nature-based solutions in the ground. So thinking about very specific applied research that speaks to decision makers and actionable science to also make that work happen on the ground. And I also wanted to mention a need for a stronger equity lens in this work, always asking ourselves who benefits from this work and how can we be better at trust and relationship building, which is the foundation of success. And in terms of thinking about inclusion of more perspectives and focus, just touching on the fact that when we do this work, it's predominantly through a Western and global North lens. And so how can we be better at incorporating visions, viewpoints, expertise from the global South and Indigenous knowledge? There's often a saying about including more people around the table, but really considering how might we rebuild that table together in a more collective fashion. And then, of course, lastly, the triple bottom line focus. Let's really think about economic recovery and building back, but not with single sector solutions, and think about the intersections of where urban nature-based solutions can benefit not just nature, but people as well. Thank you so much for your interest and time and support of the Naturvation initiative. It's so heartening to see and know that 1,000 people around the globe are working together and joining us today to make positive change for both people and nature in the future. Thank you. You're on mute.
Thank you very much, Julie, for showing us so many of the projects that you are working on in different US cities. The equity lens, of course, is so present and so important in the American context, as we can just see it now with how public space is so much of a space of danger also for people of color and for minorities. So thinking also about their perspective in mind is very important. So I will now introduce our second speaker, Robbie Beaver. Robbie is the political coordinator of the PES group at the Commission for Environment, Climate and Energy at the European Committee of the Regions. At this particular commission, Robbie is rapporteur of the COR opinion called Biodiverse Cities and Regions Beyond 2020 for the UN CBD COP15 and in the next EU strategy. So really working from cities to a much broader scale and kind of political arena. In Luxembourg, however, he's also a member of the Gothenburg Council and president of the largest environmental protection association, Natur and Umwelt. So he has really a diversity of professional environments in which he's developing his work. So thank you very much, Robbie, for sharing those different scales of action. I am just about to share now your screen, put my screen. I think it should be there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, dear Isabel and dear audience. Greetings from Luxembourg. Yes, and I'm honored to contribute to today's discussion by adding a policy point of view to this discussion. In particular, as you can see from the next slide, please, I would like to break down the policy part of nature-based solutions at three levels: the local, the European, and the global level. At the local level, because as Isabel said, I'm a member of the municipal council on a relatively small city in Luxembourg. At the European level, as member of the European Committee of the Regions, and at the global level, because the Committee of the Regions is also active in the preparatory process of the global policy framework for biodiversity and nature in the next decade. Today I will present very briefly each of these three levels, highlighting how nature-based solutions can contribute to economic regeneration, inclusion, and societal well-being, especially after the COVID-19 crisis. But if you have any question, please come back to me during the discussion or via the chat. If we can move to the next slide, please. We start with the local level by presenting the Sicona initiative. Sicona was an idea that originated in the early 1980s, and the idea has been to create an association of municipalities that could cooperate in the development and implementation of a joint nature conservancy policy. In implementing such joint policy, we wanted to organize the municipal nature conservation in the most efficient and cost-effective way. We wanted also to maintain and develop the native flora and fauna in their habitats as a local contribution to the protection of globally threatened biodiversity. You can see in the next slide the geographical coverage of Sicona and the objectives of this initiative. Objectives that not only focused on conservation and restoration of nature and biodiversity, but also aimed at achieving economy benefits as well as increasing the well-being of local population. In the next slide, what does this mean in practical terms? Here you can see an overview of some activities. I will not go through them due to lack of time, but rather focus on the impact that these nature-based solutions brought to the local communities and its population, as per next slide, please. Some lessons learned were nature-based solutions used in Sicona municipalities, for example, flood protection and restoring and recreating habitats, are less expensive than technical solutions, but need more space. The well-being and health of the population is an argument for local politicians to implement an environmentally friendly policy. Third, involving the public in nature protection increases the political motivation for an increased nature protection. And regional marketing is a fantastic instrument to bring producers and consumers together. And economic arguments are the best. Farmers earning money by nature protection projects is a strong argument. Therefore, municipalities have many opportunities to use nature-based solutions, and Econa and its members have realized many nature and landscape conservation projects during the last 30 years. However, despite these efforts, we have to consider to realize that the situation of nature and biodiversity in Luxembourg is worse than 25 years ago due to severe pressure by urbanization and the efforts of the common agricultural policy, the effects of this policy. This is one of the reasons I wanted to go beyond the local action and undertake policy action also at the European level. As you can see in the next slide, being a member of the European Committee of the Region, you could show, or you should know that in Europe, 70% of all legislation is implemented by cities and regions, by local and subnational governments. This is why there is an institution dedicated to represent formally cities and regions in the policy-making process on EU level. One of the main topics that the Committee of the Regions work on is biodiversity, and Isabel told you I'm working on opinions about biodiversity. So in the next slide, this text mentions that innovative nature-based solutions are among the most effective tools for restoring ecosystems and mobilizing people's ability to thrive with nature, as pointed out also by the 2020 Naturvation project report. The document also highlights the role of local and subnational authorities in contributing significantly to relevant UN conventions, including the UN 2030 Agenda and Paris Agreement. This is possible through nature-based solutions that are sensitive and specific to social, economic, and ecological contexts. Cities and local and subnational authorities have to develop and implement such nature-based solutions, but one of the key elements is, of course, financing. I am aware of the work done by Naturvation on this topic, and I wish to add the findings of the study that the Committee of the Regions did on biodiversity finance for European cities and regions. The study first provided an overview on those opportunities that exist at European level. It then focused on the 5 European countries that are France, Italy, Poland, Luxembourg, and Finland. Thanks to this review of existing opportunities, it was possible to identify the main barriers and challenges in accessing such funding. Due to time constraints, I will only show these barriers to biodiversity finance in the next slide, please. The very interesting point on nature-based solutions is that despite gradually gaining in popularity, knowledge is lacking on best fit solutions in various natural, climate, and socio-economic conditions. Many examples of small local projects exist, but their replication and or upscaling requires technical expertise that is not often readily available to subnational governance, especially to smaller municipalities that are nevertheless one of a high number and covering a large area of EU member states. In the coming years, there should be therefore European-funded projects that can address the need for administrative capacity building on nature-based solutions. However, this not only happens at the European level, but across the globe. On the next slide, you see that the Committee of the Regions is also active at the global level, thanks to our cooperation partners, such as the Scottish Government over the Edinburgh process that concluded with the Edinburgh Declaration. I invite you all, political representatives of local and regional authorities, to sign this declaration. Just scan the QR code you see on the slide for more information. But the work at global level on nature-based solutions in the preparatory process of the global policy framework for biodiversity and nature in the next decade also includes the COP15 and its summit for local and regional leader that should be co-organized by ICLEI, Regions 4 and the Yunnan province in 2021. I conclude with the last slide. Nature-based solutions can contribute to economic regeneration, inclusion, and societal well-being, especially after the COVID-19 crisis. We have seen that policy efforts are taking place at local, national, European, and global level. The next challenge is now to address the areas that make difficult the operationalization, the put into practice of these policies. I hope today's discussion will contribute to this too. Thank you. Micro, Isabel.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Robbie. I really appreciate it, seeing the work at multiple levels that have to feed into one another and enrich one another. Thank you for sharing your work on this. Our last speaker is Rob Carr. Rob has worked at the UK Environmental Agency for 17 years. So he's our, let's say, national government representative on that panel. Rob has been helping to develop the government-led catchment-based approach to managing water and land in the UK. He worked in partnership with stakeholders to tackle environmental pressures and achieve multiple sustainability benefits. Beyond his governmental work, he collaborates with Nottingham University on the Blue, Green plus Grey Learning Action Alliance and Durham University on Naturvation. So you've been a close supporter and ally of Naturvation since the beginning. Thank you so much. Let me just pull your slides. All right, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Isabel. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here today and hear all the brilliant speakers and how the importance of nature-based solutions is moving forward in this very uncertain world that we live in today. My hope is that if one positive thing comes out of the pandemic is that the light is shone even brighter on nature and the importance of the survival of our natural world, especially to the decision makers who are key to delivery of nature-based solutions. And it's interesting to hear that Julie and her organisation are looking at research into this area. I recently watched the new David Attenborough programme, Extinction, The Facts. I would highly recommend it to the listeners today. It's a very sobering watch indeed. We also talked earlier today, if you listen to any of the other presenters, about the term nature-based solutions. And I like to say, rather than use nature-based solutions, I like to say to people, nature is the solution and the most sustainable investment that you can make. I find it tends to get them thinking. So today I want to share with you my experience as a local practitioner, working on the ground with partners and stakeholders to improve our natural and built environment. I've been working specifically in this area for 6 years, and it's encouraging to see that people, communities, businesses, and decision makers are starting to engage more with the fact that nature is fundamental to the climate and the biodiversity emergency that we are all in. And it's a vital service that it provides for people and wildlife. And this has been even more magnified during the pandemic. Next slide, please. So my goal in the work that I do is to get as many dominoes lined up as I possibly can, with the evidence, the feasibility studies, the design, partnerships, economics, wider benefits, etc., so that we can then move forward into the really important delivery stage and reap the benefits of nature. However, even in the current situation that we're in today with the COVID pandemic, there are obstacles in getting the organisations, both public and non-public, to invest in nature. People are still hesitant to invest. Next slide, please, Isabel. So I wanted to bring you a local example of a project that I've been working on over the last 2 years to bring nature back to the Tyne Estuary. The Tyne Estuary is a massively heavily modified water body. It's a river that has been used for industrial heritage in the past. And also there is a growing urban area, both industrial and residential. It's crying out for more nature and all the benefits that we know nature can bring. As you can see from the slide, I've managed to get some of the dominoes lined up: the evidence, the landscape, the feasibility, the design, the permissions, and a pledge for people to sign up to support the project. But there are still problems with governance and finance, and it continues to be a real difficult area to overcome. So the question that I keep posing to myself is, will COVID bring new opportunities around governance and finance to turn these sad-faced dominoes into happy, smiley ones? Next slide, please, Isabel. We've all lived through this pandemic and are still suffering the impacts of it. And we've seen and possibly experienced the way people are flocking to nature. They're flocking to nature during this time, rightly or wrongly, for a chance to breathe and soak up all the benefits of nature. It's a natural instinct for us to be able to get out into the open air. Next slide, please, Isabel. In recent weeks, as an example, the UK government have brought a planned stimulus fund forward through the Green Recovery Challenge Fund. This is to support the economy during the pandemic, that is looking to both improve nature but also create employment, especially for charitable environmental organisations and their supply chains as they start to return to work. But competition for this funding is absolutely fierce, and it will be way oversubscribed. The government want shovel-ready projects that will deliver on the ground within 18 months, where workers can be employed and construction can begin. Highlighting the importance of having all your dominoes lined up. I'm hopeful that some of the projects that my partners and I have developed over the last few years and got some of those dominoes lined up will be successful in the bids and help to deliver projects for nature-based solutions over the coming year or so. Next slide, Isabel, please. So I just wanted today to share you one of the examples where I have some of the dominoes lined up, and it's called the Hebburn Riverside Park. It's an estuary edge on the Tyne Estuary where we have secured some funding to create salt marsh, a habitat that is sadly lost on most of the estuary itself. So this project will create habitat, it will help create employment and also bring the other benefits such as carbon sequestration. We've pursued this project using it to engage with local stakeholders and to apply what we call the ripple effect. This is a way, if the governance and the finance is not fully in place, we look to attract more bees around our honeypot. We say, look what we want to achieve, come and join our nature recovery party and all the benefits it can bring. This project runs alongside an underused and neglected urban green space that has had massively increased use during the COVID pandemic. It's become increasingly important to the local community. So COVID is shining the light on this park. So combined with some additional funding that the local authority, your municipality are bringing in, they're investing in plans to help regenerate this riverside path and this park, increasing accessibility, improving recreation facilities, and bringing all the health and well-being benefits that come with the community usage. The community engagement is also being done, and this is being done with local Sea Scouts who use the estuary for their training and exercises, but who are also now applying for community funding to bring additional funding into this park, and hope it will encourage eventually community adoption of the area, increasing local choices and bringing the social benefits that can be applied. Together with signage and engagement and education opportunities and the use of volunteers, it will bring this local area to life. We were also using impact monitoring by bringing in the local university to increase the evidence and the education. And hopefully that would be the point where we can use the evidence to help upscale our projects. So I have to say to those who didn't want to accept our first invitation to this party, to be part of our governance and investment. Look what we're achieving and the difference we're making to people in nature. We need you even more during these challenging times, and actually you may need us just as much to help achieve your objectives, especially if we are to upscale the delivery of nature-based solutions. So I will continue to get as many dominoes lined up as I possibly can and hold as many parties as I can to attract those reluctant bees, even if they have to be virtual parties. Thank you. Over to you, Isabel.
Thank you, Rob. That was very eloquent. I kept picturing each domino for me was also one green space. Like, how can we also, as you are saying, kind of upscale, multiply, let's say, the size, the scope, the aesthetics of these different projects through the different partnerships you are talking about. So thank you so much. We have exactly 9 minutes for the chat. I will just start with one question coming from me, and then I want to leave it to the floor. That's the most important. So the general question I wanted to ask is, knowing the competition that often exists between sectors, especially between, let's say, the economy, the investors, the finance, and on the other hand, the need for really deep social gains, equality, jobs, and sometimes those are very difficult to reconcile. How do you try to promote inclusion and justice without creating down the line effects such as land speculation, privatization, and other types of neighborhood redevelopment that in the end makes the benefit of nature-based solutions be captured only by a small size of residents rather than really with equity at the center or inclusion at the center of it?
Can I have a go there, Isabel?
Bob, yes.
Yeah, sure. It is a very difficult question to answer because there are so many dynamics going on. I find that one of the ways that I tend to look at it to make it as equitable as possible is choose your sites very carefully where you really want to try and get that investment in. But the added complication of that is looking to see where the opportunities come up and choosing those opportunities that you want to be involved with very carefully as well. Because you're right, you can invest in some areas where there is already equitability, but we're missing out on the areas where people really do need these nature-based solutions. So it's a hard question to answer, but I would say the choice is choosing your areas and the projects you want to be involved in very carefully.
Thank you. One question from Catherine, a colleague of ours at IFAL. Are we seeing calls for urban nature in public discussions in our countries as a result of COVID? Have you seen more, specific calls, specific funding, specific interventions now being funded and supported?
Maybe I can answer to that from a local subnational government point of view. I'm surely convinced. I'm sure that our citizens through COVID-19 realized how important nature is for their well-being, and we see the difference from families living in alone standing houses with a green garden and those families living in apartments. That's a huge difference. Those living in constrained areas in apartments had quite a lot of problems in the lockdown period. So the awareness of the importance of an intact nature and environment has risen dramatically. I can't now today not say any precise project, but I'm very confident that in future times all those politicians, local authorities that are so far not been so fond in investing in nature-based solutions, they will go in this way, and green infrastructure will be a highly important topic in next policies and budgets on local level.
Thank you. We have a question from Julie. From Milan. Do you believe from your experience that the benefits of nature-based solutions in cities, environment, but also social or economic, are less well known than those in more rural or suburban environments?
Yes, that's a firm yes. We have 70 to 100 years of data and science in the use of nature-based solutions in rural areas, less populated wilderness areas. We need more data and science for nature-based solutions in cities, absolutely. There's also a lot of great advocacy-based work that's out there. You know, here's the benefits, here's the holistic nature of these projects, but we still don't have enough of the right types of data to help convince municipal decision makers. So I echo what Robbie had said and what Rob said. We have the same challenges in that even with all of the benefits they bring and can provide from a triple bottom line perspective, we're still at the beginning of better understanding, better advocating, better collecting data and research. So yes, the playing field is uneven. We've always been thinking about nature as something separate to cities, something outside of cities to protect, when in fact cities are one with nature. They are part of the broader ecological landscape, and we need to be putting more thought and attention in nature-based solutions in cities. So thank you. That's a good question. Thank you.
I am combining two questions here. One of them, or let's say both of them, are related to convincing decision makers in cities that NBS are a good financial investment. What are the constraints that you are seeing in your work in terms of trying to advocate for green solutions to problem in comparison with gray solutions? Are decision makers really believing that gray solutions are still the best way to go? What skepticism are you encountering from them, and how is their vision changing? So maybe Julie, you have the mic on. Maybe you can start with the American perspective, and then we can move on.
I'll briefly say, and this has been my experience in many different countries I've worked in, is it's an unknown. We're used to having predictable measures, particularly when it comes to infrastructure. So nature-based solutions are considered distributed networks of infrastructure, and that is different and that is new. And the challenges that I've seen that we have faced still tend to be focused on the operation and maintenance. So yes, the implementation is difficult, but how do you also tend and care for these projects in a really different way than we haven't considered before? And my original training is as an engineer, so I know mentally, what we're taught, what we're trained, how we think about these projects, moving from traditional gray-based solutions, which do make sense in some instances, but in many instances, particularly when we need multiple benefit solutions, we need to make the most use of the dollars we have. And we know that now it's a public imperative to have more equitable access to green space and outdoors. We need to be thinking about how to work with decision makers to get the data and the information they need.
Thank you. Rob, I see you nod. Maybe you have the last words because I see it's 2:59 here. What is your experience?
Thank you. I just agree with Julie about that. And I think the decision makers know it's the right thing to do, but it's still a very difficult decision for them to make. It's a difficult choice. And I think they see that the grey is off the shelf and the green and the blue is just that much more difficult. And it gets round to the maintenance and slightly unknown aspect of it. So I think definitely agree with Julie, and that's what I come across every day as a practitioner.
Go ahead, Robbie. And then
Yeah,
I'll let you.
just to add that grey infrastructure and policies is a well-known policy field, and investing in nature-based solutions is to a high number of political decision makers. It's a new terrain, and they are afraid of new. That's a normal reflex, and I hope and I think we should have, for those, I would divide the politicians in two. Those that are convinced that they shall do something against biodiversity loss and nature protection, and those who are more conservative. And we should find an incentive to have everybody in the boat to go in this direction. That's first good practices, showing good practices and showing that those nature-based solutions are very fondly and very happily accepted by the citizens. And the second incentive is, of course, financing. And I showed the example of Sicona in Luxembourg. That's an association of municipalities that got profit from a national decision of government saying that every project, nature protection project, done by municipalities are subsidized by 50%. So that's a money incentive that convinced quite a lot of municipalities to join this Sicona idea.
All right. So some hopeful, convincing arguments here. And it seems that with COVID, definitely the call for urban nature and the multiple well-being places of refuge that nature creates in cities are really hopefully something that will kind of create an acceleration moment as well. Thank you so much. We went just 2 minutes over time. Thank you, Julie, Rob, and Robbie. It was a pleasure. And I will leave the floor to the next panel afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.